buy, and they missed the bridegroom, and they got locked out of the wedding.
Bad thing.
Now, boy, I'll tell you, there's a bunch of lessons in that one. Just think of...
It's pretty much being watchful and waiting, too. There's one lesson
Well,
in it.
yeah, but you have to be ready.
Being prepared.
Uh-oh. Now we're bringing Boy Scouts into this.
Well,
And not to mention Amanda's cousin Cletus.
yeah.
And the Lion King.
Yeah, and the Lion King. Yeah, gee, who wrote that book?
Yeah, but it's it's like being prepared, waiting for Jesus to come back again is what's...
Well, that's what that parable is talking about, but you could go into several different directions. You can even go in political sphere with that one. But some theologians say that the flame is that which is imparted to us by God and from God without our own labor. The oil is what we put in the lamp, which means we have to put it into our own life so the flame may be fed and increased and persevere and last and take us all the way to the point that we go home to be with God. See, faith does not exempt us from works. The generosity of God does not absolve us from an effort.
Generosity is just the gift he gave us.
That's correct. Life is at its noblest. It's at its best when our efforts cooperate with God's grace and produces the necessary loveliness, the good things that we do to people. Helping feed the poor, helping...
See somebody drop something in the store and help them pick it up.
Yeah.
It's like kids do this sometimes in school. And it's just that some children will help somebody else even if they don't know them.
I probably said this on here before. I use a cart, one of those motorized carts, when I go to Walmart. If I know I'm going in for one thing, I'll go to the back, wherever it is, I'll pick it up, I'll come up front, I'll pay for it, and I'll go back to my truck. If I'm going to do I got to look at this and this and this and this, I get one of them carts or I don't do it. And sometimes you want something that's on the top shelf, and people will come by and they will get it for me. Not that it hurts me to get off that cart and stand up.
I've had people do that for me. The one time I had to use the car when my shoulder was dislocated. And how grateful you feel because someone saw you trying to struggling and getting up to ask me, what do you need? I'll get it for you. That's something you should always do for anybody you see in a store or someone who needs help.
Now let's look at these virtues. It is worth noting that in the ancient world, such lists as this, add this to this, and then almost a recipe, were common. It was a world in which books were not nearly as plentiful and as cheap and readily available as they are today, so instruction usually did some kind of cadence like this, carried in the studiers of the pupil's head, and easily memorized lists were the commonest way of fixing the instruction firmly in someone's mind. There was a set of valves on one of these power plants I work on, and it used to be the favorite question of some of these examiners, how could you tell which valve was which? And you start on the left and you go, I can eat Susie's delicious candy on Wednesday. Insert. And you just went down the list, and each first letter had the name of one of the valves. Paul gives us fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control in Galatians. In the pastoral epistles, the man of God is bidden to follow after righteousness, godliness, faith, love, steadfastness, and gentleness in 1 Timothy. Now, here's a book you can go look up sometime, The Shepherd of Hermas. He says, faith, self-control, simplicity, innocence, and reverence, understanding, and love are daughters one of another. And here's another book you can look up sometime, The Epistle of Barnabas. Fear and endurance are the helpers of faith. Patience and self-control are our allies. And when these are present, a person can develop and possess wisdom, prudence, understanding, and knowledge. So let us look one by one at the stages in this list, which this letter that Paul wrote gives us. It begins with faith. Trying to combine the Greek word and the English. It begins with faith, which is pistis. P-I-S-T-I-S. Everything goes back to that. For Peter, faith is the conviction that what Jesus Christ says is true, and that we can commit ourselves to his promises and launch ourselves on his demands. It is the unquestioning uncertainty that the way to happiness and peace and strength on earth and in heaven, because you're not going to get to heaven either if you don't accept Christ, is to accept Christ and accept him at his word. Now, to faith, we have to add virtue. I'll let you pronounce that one, Scott.
Virtue is arete.
Arete? Hey, I like that. It's very rare in the New Testament, but it is the supreme Greek word for virtue in every sense of the term. It means excellence. It has two special directions in which the meaning moves. What we might call operative or efficient excellence, to take two examples of its usage from widely differing spheres. It can be used of land which is fertile, and it can be used of the mighty deeds of the gods. Arete is that virtue which makes a man a good citizen, a good friend. It's that virtue which makes that person an expert in the technique of living well. Now, it also can mean courage. Plutarch says that God is a hope of arete, not an excuse for cowardness. Excuse me. In 2 Maccabees, we read of how Eleazar died rather than be false to the laws of God and his fathers. And the story ends by saying that he left his death for an example of noble courage, arete, a memorial of virtue, not only to young men, but also to the nations. 2 Maccabees 6. In this passage, it is not necessary to choose between the two meanings. They are both here. Faith must issue not in the retirement of the courtyard or the cell, but in a life effective in the service of God and of man. Both. My wife left the room because she was coughing, and now the little doggy is going nuts. Oh well, we have it every Sunday. Now, to courage must be added knowledge. The word is gnosis. And I'm getting better at pronouncing these, Scott.
He practices.
I do. In ethical Greek language, there are two words which have a similar meaning with a very significant difference. Sophia is wisdom. Now, if you know anybody that's named Sophia, the root Greek means wisdom in the sense of knowledge of things, both human and divine, and their causes. It is knowledge of first causes and of deep and ultimate things. Gnosis is practical knowledge. You know, everyone talks to somebody to me, what wisdom is really about is putting knowledge in action. It is the ability to apply to particular situations the ultimate knowledge which Sophia gives you. Gnosis is that knowledge which enables a person to decide rightly and to act honorably and efficiently in the day-to-day circumstances of life. So then to faith must be added courage and effectiveness. To courage and effectiveness must be added the practical wisdom to deal with life. It is a shame. I wish when I went through some things in my teens, 20s, and 30s, I would have known then what I know now. I would have been able to do that practical application to deal with day-to-day life. To practical knowledge must be added self-control. Oh boy, there's one. The word is egkratia, and it means literally the ability to take a grip on yourself. This is a virtue of which the great Greeks spoke and thought about and wrote a lot about. In regard to a person and their possession or their passions, Aristotle distinguishes four states in life. There is sophrosune, which is the passion has been entirely subjugated to reason, which we might call it perfect temperance. There is akalaseia, which is the precise opposite. It is the state in which reason is entirely subjugated to passion. We might call it unbridled lust. Now, in between these two, there is acrasia, which is reason fights but passion prevails. We might call it incontinence. I don't know if I'd call it that. That was Barclay's word.
Running off at the mouth.
Yeah. And there is egratia, in which reason fights against passion and prevails, and we call it self-control or self-mastery. Egratia is one of the great Christian virtues, and its place, it holds examples of the realism of the Christian ethic. That ethic does not contemplate a situation in which a person is weakened of all passion. It's a situation in which passion remains, but it's under control, and so becomes your servant, not your tyrant. Now, to self-control must be added steadfastness. The word is hupomone. We have talked about this word a lot, and
Chrysostom.
Thank you. Chrysostom called hupomone the queen of all virtues. It's sometimes translated patience, but really that's a passive word. Patientia is its Latin equivalent. It's defined as the voluntary and daily suffering of hard and difficult things for the sake of honor and usefulness. Didymus, yeah, that guy. He's from Alexandria. Writes on the temper of Job, it is not that the righteous man must be without feeling, although he must patiently bear things which afflict him. But it is true when a man deeply feels the things he toils against, but nevertheless despises sorrow for God's sake. It doesn't mean simply to accept, it means to endure. There is always a forward look in it. It is said of Jesus by the writer to the Hebrews that for the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross, despising shame. Hebrews 12:2. That hupomone is Christian steadfastness. It is the courage to accept. It is the courageous acceptance of everything that life can do to us, and the changing of even the worst event into another step upward to glory. Okay, to steadfastness must be added piety.
Yes.
I always want to say pity. Piety. The word is eusebia, and it's really, and I've got at my disposal.
There it is again.
Yeah, I got at my disposal right now I got 3 Greek dictionaries printed, and I've got all kinds of online stuff, and that's pretty much what everybody says. It is quite untranslatable. See, even piety is inadequate, carrying as it does a suggestion sometimes of something not altogether attractive. The great characteristic of this eusebia is that it looks in 2 directions. You see, the man who has eusebia always correctly worships God and gives God his due, but he always correctly serves his fellow men and women and gives them their due. We have said many times on it, you can't love God unless you love your fellow man. It just don't work. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. If we can't forgive other people, we can't, we're not getting forgiven. We say that Lord's Prayer with reckless abandon.
Yeah.
Because we just recite the damn thing. We don't think about the words that we're actually saying when it's in. Sit down and write that out one of these times and think about every sentence or phrase that you write. I'll tell you what, there's some powerful stuff in it.
I've always said, my father taught me to say the Lord's Prayer. I think I was like 2 or 3 years old. And he would sit with me, and I remember many times, because he'd come in, then, parents tuck your child in at night. He would sit there, and I'd say, Daddy, explain it to me. And he would go line by line and explain what it meant. My dear father, who went to church and hadn't even accepted the Lord yet, was one of my best Christian teachers.
Yeah, look at that Lord's Prayer sometime. Really dig into it and see what you get. That person who has eusebes, the corresponding adjective, is in a right relationship with both God and his fellow people. And eusebia is piety, but in its most practical aspect. We may best see the meaning of this word by looking at the man whom the Greeks held to be the finest example of just about everything, and that's Socrates. It was said that he was so pious and devoutly religious that he would take no step apart from the will of God or will of heaven, so just and upright that he never did